Thanks to the entire panel. So we cybersecurity to digitalization and data. So we talk a lot about data in the industry at the moment, and data is really important to innovate. It's important for enabling our digital technologies and solutions. And harnessing data in operations not only makes workflows efficient, but also presents a big potential to save costs through better decision making, improve the customer experience, supplier experience, and so on. And it's going to be interesting to see from the panel here and hear around their first-hand practical aspects for this on board, commercial operation, port operation, and how we benefit from using and sharing data across the entire value chain. So I'll be introducing Hans Rook, Chairman, International Port Community Systems Association, who will be moderating the session. So welcome, Hans.
Good morning.
And the session and theme, overriding theme, will be around overcoming challenges in data sharing and just-in-time initiatives. Just a little bit of background on Hans. So Hans works in the transport and logistics trade sector for, is it 51 years, Hans? So impressive career.
A long time ago, right.
So let's not count back, but it's an impressive career and a long one, a lot of experience there. So he started and have been through shipping agencies, gained experience in all parts of import and export services, right, and has been heading up the ICT function in the company there as well.
Yeah.
The guru of EDI standardization, big one, joined UN working groups, working on the EDIFACT standards messages for the global sea trade industry. And then having been general manager in ICT within the shipping agency, Hans was asked to join the Rotterdam group of experts for the setup of the port community system in the port of Rotterdam. And he's then since then been working for Port Base Rotterdam until January 19, where Hans retired. The International Port Community Systems Association has chalked up some remarkable achievements in the past years. Membership has increased to the point where it's now active and has members in every continent, and has continued its increase its influence at the highest levels. And IPCSA membership has expanded beyond port and cargo community systems to include single window operators. As chairman, Hans is looking forward to moving forward as fast as possible in a strategic manner. And with IPCSA respected at intergovernmental levels, including the UN and the IMO, and many decision makers receive and value your expertise. So I'll pass over to Hans, and please join me in welcoming the various panelists. And as usual, there'll be Q&A via Pigeonhole, so please feel free to submit questions and comments there. So thank you. Over to you, Hans.
Thank you, Rasmus, for a very extensive introduction of myself. Well, the 51 years, that takes a long time, isn't it? So welcome everybody of the audience. Welcome to the session of the overcoming challenges in data sharing and just-in-time initiatives. I'm very keen to be at yours in Singapore. I have been there for many years doing developments, but also joined the Singapore Maritime Week for a couple of times. And it's a pity not to be there now and only on a distance, but I feel myself in Singapore, as you can see from my background so far. So just before starting let's say the discussion between our panelists, I will introduce the panelists of today. First of all, I want to introduce Simha, who doesn't know him yet. He was there yesterday also, Global Chief Digital and Information Officer at the Mediterranean Shipping Company, responsible for implementing and developing the complex data flows between the company's headquarters and agencies around the globe, and as well as steering our MSC's business towards the digital future of the shipping and logistics sector. Then Bruce Mills from Wartsila, a global business development director with more than 20 years of experience working in the maritime industry worldwide, subject matter expert in vessel traffic services systems, coastal surveillance, offshore surveillance systems, smart ports, port management information systems, and port digitalization projects. Third, Geert de Wilde, Chief Operation Officer of NxtPort International, improving the supply chains via trusted data sharing by applying extended value stream thinking in a globalized and digitalized way. Then last but not least, Mikael Lind. Mikael is a professor in maritime information at the Chalmers University of the Technology and senior strategic research advisor at the Research Institute of Sweden, RISE. Mikael serves as an expert for World Economic Forum, European Digital Transport Logistics Forum, the DTLF, and UNCFAC. He has been the lead author and many concept notes associated to maritime and transport information brought up by international trade press and has become recognized through leader in maritime informatics. So far, the introduction of our panelists of today. Before we forget, we will have, let's say, about half an hour, 35 minutes in total, about discussion on a number of subjects of today. And afterwards, we have the Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, and they will be on the screen later on, and we will point to certain people the question so they can answer on that to satisfy your needs so far. So next slide, please. It's about the transformation of growth. Increasing port efficiency is critical to ensure a smooth and seamless supply chain and flow of goods. The just-in-time concept, promoted by the International Maritime Organization and the work of the International Task Force of Port Call Optimization, have provided a basis for global standards for all types of vessels as well as terminals with the port environment. The challenge is the practical implementation of just-in-time concept. This implementation relies on multiple parties collaborating at an international standard level for both data and technical standards. In that respect, we identified three major data and technical standards initiatives these days. It's the IMO, Just-in-Time Arrival Guide, International Task Force for the Port Call Optimization, and DCSA's Just-in-Time Standards. And apart from those standards, a number of software solutions that support the community in the ports, being NaviPort, NaviPort, which we will talk about today from Bruce, Port CDM, well known by Michael, and Port Exchange provided by the Port of Rotterdam authorities. A number of ports these days are doing pilots, and I just mentioned a number of them, about 9, Algeciras, Tangier, Port of Rotterdam, Port of Gothenburg, Singapore, Houston, Hamburg, or Valencia, just to name a few. So overcoming challenges in data sharing and just-in-time initiatives, that's the subject of today. So next slide, please. The keywords of today, and that will be the discussion, is collaboration, technical standards, optimum performance of port players, network to establish communication about vessel voyages info and about port of port info, pilots to prove the solution, but from pilot to operational use, very important, and sustainability. So that is the introduction of myself, and I will now go over to, let's say, our panel and have the discussion, lively discussion going on. Collaboration. It's nice to have a set of tools, but how to align the mindsets? Pragmatism of all parties involved in and around the port call. I sometimes compare it with a set of playing cards. You have a set of playing cards in your hands, but what can you do with the playing cards when there are no players? That's the main thing where we are talking about, collaboration in the port. So my first question is to Andre. Andre, in May, Maritime Shipping Corporation will participate in Valencia. Can you tell us more about that, that pilot or production maybe even? You're muted, Andre.
Yeah, apologies. I was trying to unmute. Good morning, yeah, and thank you for having me here. Well, I think, you know, you mentioned the deck of cards. And yes, you need players to play the game, but you also can play the game because the cards have been standardized. Otherwise, if you were playing with everybody having his own deck of cards, you know, it wouldn't work. So I think this is what it's about, at least from a DCSA perspective, and of course MSC. Right. More specifically on the, we're talking about, you know, reliability of shipping and port operations. We're talking about cargo visibility. We're talking about electronic documentation for international trade. So all these topics basically come together. And looking at the current pilots that we're doing in Valencia, basically DCSA provided a message hub which serves as the starting point for the just-in-time port call information. And here, each participant in the pilot is requested to share standardized messages with up to 50 available timestamps standardized across the various interactions in a test environment. And terminals and carriers are now exchanging this and of course working on the quality of the data, because that's key to demonstrating the purpose. And this pilot is running until about May, I believe, and that's when we'll be able to see the outcome for this particular cluster. And then, as you mentioned, there are several other clusters that are taking place at the same time.
Right. Andre, you mentioned terminals and carriers. Are the port authorities involved as well?
Yes, of course, absolutely, absolutely. We have very strong support from the port authorities working together with the terminal. I mean, you need to have everybody on board, otherwise it won't happen. And you know, to a certain extent, you mentioned it before, it's very logical that we need to share information to ensure that that the supply chain continues to work. But it's not always so simple. You need, of course, software integrations. I'm sure you know Bruce will mention that. So it does require the will to collaborate.
Yes, I understand that, and it's well, yeah, there's a lot of techniques in the background, but the collaboration of the people, the stakeholder management, the change management, well, we know those definitions and the terms, is so important. I think when you're working together with the foundation of Valencia, the Port Foundation of Valencia, they are well known and they are trained in stakeholder management. So I see a lot of success coming over in Valencia. So hopefully it will be, let's say, not only an eye-opener, but also be a very good example how things can run in ports like Valencia. Bruce, your name was already mentioned by Andre. You deliver a complete package to execute the pilots today in Wartsila, in the leads, to not only install the software, but also to support the stakeholders involved. I think that's one of the important things. Wartsila clearly describes in the yearbook of 21 that sustainability, CO2 emission reduction, is one of the topics for Wartsila in their future development. How does it match with the topic today? Just in time, at the same time bearing the headline in mind, transformation for growth. So doesn't growth cancel the pursuit of CO2 reduction? What's your opinion about that?
Thank you, Hans. And firstly, thanks for the invitation. Very much appreciate being given the opportunity to come and share some of the knowledge and the experiences that we have. Quite a deep question, I think, Hans, and I think in the 30 minutes that we have, it's difficult to sort of get into too much detail, but just at the high level, I mean, Wartsila as a global manufacturer of maritime technology has been engaged in the pursuit of decarbonisation. We see as a strategic objective decarbonisation, and to support the maritime industry to this end. We have a number of initiatives, you know, clearly on board. There's a lot of machinery, a lot of equipment that Wartsila provides. So we are working in the field of alternative fuels, ammonia, hydrogen, route optimization, fuel performance monitoring, and so on. However, those technologies, whilst they're incredibly important and will form a significant contribution towards decarbonisation of the maritime industry, they're not the whole solution. So just in time is a concept that we embraced right at the beginning when this subject was being discussed many, many years ago. The challenges that we had really, though, in introducing some solutions were really quite numerous, not least it required collaboration between the port authorities, the terminals, the stakeholders on the shore, and at the same time, the shipping companies, the shipping operators. And traditionally, that collaboration has not really been quite so strong as we would like. So Wartsila is in quite a unique position in that we have customers, we have projects which span the entire maritime stakeholder community. So we were actually able to act a bit like matchmakers. We were able to bring the various stakeholders together. And introduce some technologies which facilitate the just-in-time operation. Now we have a range of products under the banner called NxtPort. NxtPort is a tool which connects the maritime, the port, the terminals directly with the ships. You know, in order to improve operational efficiencies within ports and harbours, it's important first to have good communications between the stakeholders, to be able to coordinate amongst the stakeholders, and to be able to plan and optimize the resources within the ports. So NxtPort is able to connect directly to the ECDIS on board the ship. Now, every ship requires an electronic chart display information system, a navigation system, and every ship requires a passage plan, and every ship is required to monitor its progress along that passage plan. So actually, on board the ship, the master knows exactly what his ETA is. Traditionally, this information has been relayed from the ship, maybe through the Fleet Operations Centre, maybe through agents, but it's been rather disjointed, and as a result, there's been too many opportunities for errors to be made, and as a result, planning has been very, very difficult. By having direct connectivity with the ship, it means that everybody is using one source of truth, one source of information. Everybody is able to plan and agree. All the stakeholders, the tugs, the pilots, the terminals are able to plan their operations. So that when the ship does arrive, the whole port call process should be seamless and efficient, optimizing the resources within the ports.
Great, Bruce. Thank you very much for your extended explanation. And I hope it's very clear for the audience, and maybe there are questions later on, but we look at that and in a later stage. And the third speaker of today I want to introduce is Geert. Geert, looking to your environment, good and efficient data exchange between ports, PCSs can certainly contribute to more optimized just-in-time sailings. Think about connection port of departure, connected vessel, connected next port of arrival. Well, you have a pilot running between Houston and Singapore when I read it correctly one of these days. A matter of collaboration between coordination and synchronization, an expanded kind of just-in-time approach. So from NxtPort International, how do you see the aspect or concept of global connectivity, or how NxtPort wants to shape it?
Thank you for the question, Hans, and from my side as well, many thanks for having me here today. Still early in the morning, but I'll try to give you a short answer, and also going back to the previous speakers. I think what is important in this just-in-time concept is to have, of course, at one side, the right technology in place. And that's an important point. Is also to understand what the customers need. It's to be able to blend basically authority data, public data, and private data in a very complex system, keeping in mind that shippers, companies are looking today for resilience in their supply chain. And they have to go from what we have seen about 2 years ago, where the focus has been very much on visibility. Today, it's all about predictability, and just to make that supply chain more resilient and, of course, also more sustainable. So besides the technology, you need a set of terms and conditions, I would say, which is through a legal process always something not funny. But you also need to create an environment of trust on which you then are able to host existing third-party software solutions who can help immediately, basically, the supply chain to grow. And I want to stress that point is, well, don't reinvent the wheel, because there's already a lot which exists indeed on our marketplace today, with about more than 50 APIs which are helping logistics companies, the full supply chain on an end-to-end basis, to use data and to reuse that single source of truth, which has been mentioned, reuse that in different applications. So I would say the infrastructure exists. It is something which has to be applied. And what's hampering, I would say, a good rollout, whether it's a proof of concept, proof of value, or the real solution, is basically the maturity level of the stakeholders, the players in such market fields. We all know that in logistics, most of the companies are not at the top yet of where they should be, especially looking at the customer portfolio. Industry is thinking on in a way of Industry 5.0 with everything connected. In logistics, we are not necessarily yet there, and that's the gap which we have to bridge. And data sharing is one of the points where you can do that.
Thank you, Geert. A very clear answer on the question, I think. Well, we come back to that later, how to go from pilots to production, for instance. But the next speaker, Mikael, I come to you. We hear about the maturity of data already from Geert. We heard about the one source of information for Bruce. And my question to you is that we have discussed the most critical, we did not yet discuss the most critical part of being able to schedule a just-in-time call. It's the reliability of the data. How to manage data quality and exponential growth of data streams. What's your opinion about that?
Thanks a lot, and good morning also to everybody, and thanks for having me on this panel. I think that this question is crucial, as we are saying, Hans, here. And first of all, I would like to go back towards what is really maritime operations and how is that conducted. And I think that we need to admit that we do not have an overarching control function for all the data and for all the operations that are happening in the sector. It is a very self-organized ecosystem which requires collaboration on equal level. I think that is extremely important that we face that. The way we have perceived this, and we did that through port collaborative decision making, which was a concept that was borrowed from the aviation sector. Is something called airport collaborative decision making. I know, Bruce, I think if I'm rightly informed, that very much of your infrastructure is building up on that concept, and that has now been in the Port of Valencia. I know that there were some spin-off companies coming out of that that is also basically building up on the efforts that we did within the Valencia Port Foundation and RISE together. And basically the fundamental idea was that we want to provide situational awareness, building up on multiple data sources and not positioning anyone above the other. That was one part of it. And the other part was that you wanted to match different data sources with each other. So, for example, if the agent would report that I will be on time, and then we had an AIS feed, and we saw that, okay, but this is absolutely impossible, because then the ship needs to fly from Southern Europe up to Gothenburg in order to make it in time. So this type of matching of data becomes extremely important. And I think that those platforms that are being derived and implemented needs to have those kind of abilities. The other thing that I think that we need to also realize is that just in time is about challenging the prominent culture of shipping that has been we serve you as you come. And in principle, okay, I think that you have some scheduling that is pursued within the container industry, yes, but the industry is very much also utilizing infrastructure that is shared with very many other parties. I mean, pilots are not only handling, and tugboats are not only handling container ships, they are handling other things as well. So in that respect, it's very promising that we have the just-in-time concept to bring us from coordination based on the physical presence to something more of a virtual ticketing. But we also need to realize that 80% of the ports in the world do not have these digital capabilities that we need. So it's a very long journey, and I hope, honestly, that we will see some effects coming out of this, and not just by the big ports doing things. I mean, we have 4,900 other ports in the world that is not really coping with this situation. So having said that, I think that one of the key things is really to not just derive track and trace data, meaning historical data and action data, but also managing to move more towards predictability. And that is something that our cargo owners, the users of the transport ecosystem, really would appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikael, for your extensive answer on the questions so far. You know, I'm the chairman of the International Port Community System Association, so we do take care of the interests of the PCSs globally. And when we look at data sharing, especially all over the world where we come, it's always the challenge to have the change management done in the right way, because there's always something about trust, about the data. Who's the not the owner of the data, but where is my data? What happens to my data? So I think trust and neutrality of platforms all over the world is one of the key things to make it work, that you get data sharing done. And you can see it in the bigger ports where you have the PCSs all around, that there's a lot of trust, and people are getting more and more open to share data. But of course, it has also to do with cultures all over the world. So there's a lot of steps to be taken in the future as well. Look into change management, for instance, and then we talk about, let's say, the data sharing as well. One of the topics is always how to get people aligned. You know, it's very easy for people to sit back and say, we have always done it this way. Why should we change? Well, there are a number of methodologies to change the way they think, and sometimes, not sometimes, but these words, I did masterclasses before, I say, I don't want to hear these words, we have always done it this way. And then at a certain moment they come to a conclusion and say, we should have done this already years ago, the change. So that's the way to go, from we have done it always this way to why didn't we do it before? So I think that's a big challenge to be taken into mind. So that's about data sharing so far. Looking to platforms, the maturity of data is very important, of course, as already mentioned by Geert and also by Bruce. When you have data, but the data is not correct, well, then you still have a big problem all over the world. What will happen to, let's say, voyages when we talk about just in time? So the maturity of data is well, most important one of the things to be covered. And look into port community systems, or let's say to ports, and then I focus on Mikael again. Should be, we need to assure, from my point of view, that specific stakeholders are responsible for the data quality. Because when you are in the port, and I know the port users for many, many years already, they ask the terminal, when do you expect that the vessel will arrive? The agency sent the information in name of the carrier to the port authorities, to the customers. So other people ask the agencies. Third people ask, let's say, pilot stations, for instance. So they get 3 different answers, or can get the same answer, but sometimes they get different answers also about the definition. When you talk about pilots, they talk about arrival at pilot station. When you talk about customers, they talk about arrival at the quay site. So there's a lot of difference in definitions, and it must be very, very clear in all the definitions that we use all over the world. We use the same definition about, let's say, ETA. What is ETA? So there are many ETAs, I can tell you, in each and every port. So that said, I think, Mikael, I'll come back to you again. Do you think that there should be specific stakeholders responsible for the data quality in ports? of course, from legal regulation.
That's a tough one, and I will tell you an experience, and then maybe this is unreasonable. When we ran 13 test beds of port collaborative decision making, we had a real-time data sharing platform bringing out timestamps both on actuals and also estimates / planned from these different stakeholders, and we built this on an API structure where data was shared, and then it was possible to subscribe to the data for some kind of situation awareness tool. And what we found when we made those integrations is that, exactly as you're saying, Hans, there were very many different conceptions of the same phenomena. And the way that we had to introduce this was because I mean, just the question of that, the different stakeholders do not acknowledge the port call identification in the same way. Just that small question. That means that you would have a severe challenge to manage to match a timestamp coming from MSC, let's say, and a timestamp coming from the Port Authority, from the pilot, from the tug. So what we did was that we created, based on IALA's MRN standard, a certain way of bringing those timestamps into the same united unifier, and we both shared the data on the identification thing from the let's say if MSC provided something, then they had a way to identify the port call, but then we also tailored it to a unique identifier that everybody could refer to. So this was a little bit of taking the steps incrementally in coming and acknowledging the same thing in the same way by the different actors, but trying to enter, as shipping is so global, and enter an identification project that everybody will rearrange their IT systems will not happen.
Thank you, Mikael. And I focus now on Andre, and not in his role from MSC actually, but more from DCSA point of view. DCSA has been set up a couple of years back to establish the standards, especially standards for the business-to-business environment, to have, let's say, system-to-system operability and to make life much easier. How far are you so far with the standardization, Andre, on DCSA level? Can you give an answer on that?
Well, sure. I mean, I think we as DCSA, we started in the early days with what Mikael mentioned a few minutes ago, trying to define what we meant by vessel departure, vessel arrival, and trying to get a common language so that we could then work on the data elements. And I think that was one of the initial work that we did in DCSA. And then we also created a blueprint of all the operations of all the shipping lines to say, okay, we do agree that we all do the same job, maybe in a different way, but that the key milestones were the same. So, but like any transformational journey that we're undertaking, you need the buy-in from all the people that are affected by it, and you can't do that in isolation, especially in our industry, which is very, very much interconnected. However, if you look at other industries, I think for those of us who start to travel again, I think you remember that when a flight has actually landed, it has actually landed. And when a flight is supposed to depart at a certain time to go to a certain location, everybody knows what the flight is, how many people are on board, what fuel is on board, when it's going to leave, what is the flight plan, what is going to be the route. And even when you're coming over to Singapore, they tell you the flight is going to be 11 hours and 51 minutes, and it is 11 hours and 51 minutes. So there's got to be, something that allows you to do that. So I think a lot of the work we can do in the standardization processes is to look at other industries and to learn from that.
Yes, right. Standardization and harmonization are the basis for data sharing, isn't it? Otherwise, the system operability, you can forget about that. The systems will not understand each other with all the problems. And I remember when I talked with Thomas about DCSA a couple of years back, talk about bookings, you say we have 15,000 different standard messages coming in on bookings. So that was the basis to develop that part. But okay, that's outside the scope of today's subject. Back to Geert for a moment. Well, Bruce has also said a lot, but Geert, I read about your pilot this moment between Houston and Singapore. Can you elaborate more on that?
Well, the vessel, you refer to the vessel and arrival departure API, which has just been live released after an extensive testing period with Deer Park in the port of Houston. And this is basically providing terminal information to other port users, stakeholders. Now, in this particular case, which makes it very interesting, and this is a topic which we didn't touch yet, is that we are exchanging this data with another platform, which is called Port Exchange in the Port of Houston. So here we have a clear example of how interoperability works, and the information of the terminal is being passed through NxtPort to Port Exchange, who can then use, of course, always taking into consideration the specific terms which we use and apply on a platform that the data provider has at any given time is in charge of his data. So the final choice through a digital handshake is always with the data provider. It's not like an open stream of data which starts once a contract is signed. No, in this specific case, this is an API which can be used in different ports and will also be used in the port of Singapore for certain terminals. It's not only for the current users, but it's open as each and every application on the NxtPort platform is built in a spirit of being open, secure, low entry. These are basically also the golden rules which we apply. We can do that and make that connection with other platforms, and that will of course enable and also stimulate a kind of standardization, because you can have two platforms if they each have different standards. Again, there has to be some rework done, but if we apply immediately the standards as suggested by DCSA, for instance, of course, that makes the job easier, and makes also that if you look at an end-to-end supply chain, you're gonna have data available at the end of the day from the starting point till the end point, using different stakeholders, different shipping lines, different terminal operators. It will also give the flexibility, I think, which is much needed today by today's shippers who are looking for different ways of shipping their goods due to the different disruptions which we have seen. This will, I believe, only increase, and they will need a flexible but standard way to connect with all the different new and old stakeholders all together to share that data.
Right. Thank you, Geert. About standards, about the systems, and then look at Bruce, and you already mentioned Port Exchange and Bruce's NxtPort, of course. We all know the International Task Force of Harmonization, and that on that level there has been a lot done already on standardization of the data attributes. Of course, we have the IMO guides, the data reference model from the IMO, which is leading in that case. And it's just my question to NxtPort and Port CDM in this case. I'm pretty sure, but I want to have the answer from your side, that you use those standards, that they all use the same kind of standards. And the same is, of course, for DCSA in the set of standards they provide now on APIs and the tools they have, that the same data standards are used in each and every system. Is that correct, Bruce? May I ask it first to you?
Thank you, Hans. Yes, of course. I mean, of course, Wartsila has been developing software solutions for the maritime industry for many, many years, and we learned very early on to be careful not to produce rigid, fixed solutions which are not agile, and so the platform that we've developed is flexible, it's configurable, it complies with as many of the standards are available at the moment. There are various different standards that are being proposed that will eventually come into a unified, globally accepted document, I'm sure. But for now, we're keeping all our options open. We're remaining agile. We are seeing this technology as something which is still evolving and developing. We are keen to ensure that the platform is agnostic, so can interface and can connect to any ECDIS, regardless of manufacturer. We're not looking to provide some kind of closed commercial product here. We're looking to provide a platform that will be of maximum value to the broader range of stakeholders within the maritime community.
Thank you, Bruce. Mikael, Port CDM, well, one of the first ones in the world of just-in-time procedures together with the Internet Task Force. We met each other a lot of time in the working groups and meetings, and I'm pretty sure that it is yes or yes that you use the standards. Is it?
Of course, and I think the interesting part is that I come from RISE, Research Institutes of Sweden, and that my role is really to try to think a little bit ahead and think about what is there to come. And we initiated Port CDM in 2013. We were very ahead of our time, and people were just saying, Mikael, you are talking about something that will be implemented in 2030. And I'm very, very happy to see both Geert and Bruce now talk about these type of aspects. And we have a number of different solutions that are coming out there. Interestingly for us now is that we bring forward two perspectives. One is that we do regard the port as a hub, rather than just acknowledging the window to the sea. And that is something that is coming now, where you need to manage the integration between different modes of transports. And that is also a question of sharing data on events and timestamps for example, a train arriving to the port and the container being on board the train needs to be unloaded to a ship. And for that purpose, we have also initiated now work on what we call station CDM, yard CDM, which are the same type of phenomena, but for other types of transport modes. And there are different characteristics of those industries. I mean, train tracks is something that you cannot pass a train if there is not another track in the way. But that is what you can do in the air. You can do that in the sea. You can pass each other. That is not possible. So that you have an infrastructural constraint in another way, etc. But again, and this is very challenging, especially for ports, because ports do need to acknowledge standards that comes from many different sectors. IMO cannot regulate the timestamp information that is needed for train arrivals, for example. It's impossible. So it's a great challenge for ports to actually adopt standards for the different means of transport that are supposed to be working in relation to the port. So, I mean, we have a long journey to go. This is the first step towards something that will enhance the predictability for the supply chain or the beneficial cargo owners, and I think this is in the right way, but we have a long journey.
Yeah, right. Mikael, you heard Rasmus made the introduction of myself. I started my career in 71. And already in 71, 72, I was amazed about the difference in standards, especially with dangerous cargo. Dangerous cargo by rail is completely different notification than by sea or by road. And that was already in 71. Now we are 51 years later. It's still the case. So there's a lot of work to do. And I hope that in the coming years, that especially when I look to Andre as chairman of DCSA, DCSA is doing a good job in that respect as well, to have the hinterland and the seaside synchronized, so that we are able to, and then we come to the subject today again about data sharing, that we are able to share the data and that we are able to grow and to use system-to-system operability as much as possible to overcome the problems today. So that said, I see I have only 5 minutes, and I ask Ximin, are there questions from the audience?
No, we currently have no questions.
Let me see what I can pin this one.
Yes, currently we have no questions.
No, no questions yet, is it? No.
Would you like to continue the conversation while we wait for a few minutes? If not, it's okay if we can end here as well.
Yeah, well, if there are no questions, then it must have been clear, isn't it? Or people have to absorb and come later with questions. And that's also possible, I think, Shimin, to have questions later on that we can send out to our esteemed panelists and to myself for answers. That's no problem at all. So if there are no questions so far, it must be very clear or difficult for people. That's also possible, of course. But I want to thank the panelists of today, Bruce, Mikael, Geert, and Andre for being the guest of this session during the Singapore Maritime Week. And I sincerely hope that next year we will have a new session on whatever aspect of the trade and logistics again, and that we can meet each other over there in Singapore, which is always great to be there. Thank you so much, and thank you also for the coordination and support given by the team of the Singapore Maritime Week to make this this session to a very fruitful and a very good one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hans. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Everybody on the panel. I'm a little bit baffled that the issues with the standards are as bad today as it was 51 years ago, but I guess we all have some work to do there, but definitely need to rely on Thomas and Andre and so on to expedite that work, as it's one of the obvious key elements to really enable the digital strategies and technologies that are coming out. But thank you very much for a very good discussion.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Rasmus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Bye.